Welcome, Patrick Girondi, to TrialSite News, our YouTube channel. Patrick, it's always a pleasure. Since our first article chronicling your story, we call the FamilyMan, developing gene therapies to help with, significant thalassemia and sickle cell, conditions that are afflicting many people around the globe. You've, put your own time, your own money to develop compelling solutions. If you could maybe update us where you're at with your litigation, both with Memorial Sloan Kettering, MSK, also Bluebird, and any other activities ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, in November of 2020, San Rocco Therapeutics should have been ready to get back into patients because we have a trial that's open right now. The trial was opened in 2012, treated the first patient in November of 2012, treated 3 patients on the protocol with the medicine, the vector, lentiviral vector that San Rocco made way back in 2009. It was reported in the European hematology meeting, and in an abstract and then an article, that 2 out of 3 of the patients we treated using a vector that we made now 14 years ago, and using very light chemotherapy to make space in the bone marrow, that 2 out of 3 of these patients have a reduction of blood transfusions till today of 43%, which is really a miracle. There are drugs out there that reduce blood transfusions by 20 to 30% that cost $400,000 to $500,000 a year. Reblozyl, I believe, is one of the products. We were ready to get into clinical trials. Sloan Kettering was supposed to return everything to us, including any improvements, et cetera. We knew from publications in 2015 and 16 that Sloan Kettering was working with our vector and what's the word for it? Ameliorating it or making it better. There has been talk since probably, 2003 or 4 that the lentiviral vectors that we use and Bluebird Bio uses would be safer with an insulator on them. Now, originally, Bluebird had the CHS4 insulator on their product. They took it off. We are experimenting with another insulator. Sloan Kettering experimenting with another insulator. We knew about it. And Sloan Kettering, between us and Sloan Kettering, there's some kind of a dispute because they don't see it that we're entitled to all of this, all of the improvements that were made to the product. And so right now we're talking and we're in litigation. We are trying to sue them to get everything that we should have gotten, plus damages, because we lost 2 years again. With Bluebird Bio, they got approved using basically our product, or at least parts of our product. We're suing them for patent infringement. They don't deny it. I don't see how they could. But what they did do was they filed an IPR, which is an inter-party reserve. It's IPR, and what it basically means is they're going to the patent office and saying that this patent should have never been issued. So if the patent office agrees with them that the patents should have never been issued, then there's no harm, according to Bluebird Bio. To me, I don't know that it'll really make a difference, because even though if they get the patents knocked out, which I guess is possible, not probable, but possible, they were issued when they did basically steal them or use them. And we recently have filed in Massachusetts, and we filed under RICO. So Massachusetts has a state RICO law, and we filed against Nick Leschly personally, Third Rock Ventures, Bluebird Bio, who we know for sure sabotaged our project back in 2010 and 2011. And the reason that we did that was because when we settled in 2020, no one ever told us that Bluebird Bio was using our product. We would have never settled had we known that we didn't have an exclusive on our product. And now we find out that Bluebird is using it. So that kind of blew the settlement agreement. And now we're going back and suing them for RICO, which is what we started to do in 2017. And that's where we are today.
So, and I appreciate that, Patrick. It's a good, concise summary. There's a lot to pack into there. And, you know, for the readership or viewers of TrialSite that have followed, you know, the articles and your story, they'll sort of get it. But others might come in at different points. And you know, I would like to try to summarize things as we go as well. So, you know, the fascinating thing about this is that you settled this legal dispute with Memorial Sloan Kettering, and you know they agreed that you know essentially to move on, and part of that was that you had rights to the intellectual property, correct?
Yes, yes, and that's part of the dispute now with Memorial Sloan Kettering. As a matter of fact, we filed against them in New York to basically get them to own up or to actually collaborate the way that the settlement indicates. They have a dispute. They say no. They read the settlement agreement a different way. And so unfortunately, eventually it's likely, unless there's some kind of a deal before that, the judge will be able to decide. And
so, sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, you know, Dan, it unfortunately most always comes down to money. So way back in 2013, Cowan and company reported that Bluebird Bio product would be around 700,000 or 800,000. And even though it wasn't Bluebird saying that, they had taken that from executives at Bluebird. San Rocco Therapeutics always said that the product would start out at 700,000 and then go down. Our product was sabotaged. It's a safer product. We use the wild type beta globin gene. Bluebird uses a mutant gene. Most often, the natural genes or the natural way to do things are safer. Bluebird ended up going behind and stealing and sabotaging the product. It's all nothing that I'm saying we need to back up with evidence, because you can go into the court case in New York and read all of the evidence, emails, PowerPoints, etc. So
sorry, go ahead. Then I have a question.
Yeah. So in November of 2020, we all settled. And I believe that settling meant that I was getting my product with all the improvements, because I would never go into patients with a product that wasn't ideal. And then we could compete with Bluebird and be able to treat the patients for roughly $700,000 a patient. $700,000, the number comes from, it costs roughly $300,000 a patient, somewhat under that, to treat every patient. So for me, okay, if I can treat 30, 40 patients in a year, you make $400,000 a patient, you pay your overhead, you pay for everything. And when the company starts becoming profitable, you lower the price, you lower the price, you lower the price.
Right.
Instead, Bluebird got approved at $2.8 million. And that's really where all the dispute is.
Yeah.
This is all about money.
I agree with you. I think if we just, you know, real quickly go back, and I think just for the audience, just summarize this class of therapy and the targeted indications. Just a quick story about your son and how this unfolded. Then we'll get into some of the litigation.
So my son was diagnosed in 1992. In 1993, I started San Rocco Therapeutics. It wasn't called that back then, but that's when I started it. And we worked with histone deacetylase inhibitors, which stimulated fetal hemoglobin. My son avoided 5 or 6 years of transfusions during the 90s, when you really didn't want to transfuse because of the problem with AIDS and hepatitis C. In 2000, I met Memorial Sloan Kettering's Michel Settlin. He had published in Nature magazine. He had cured 6 generations of thalassemic mice. sickle cell disease and thalassemia are both beta globin genes. So if you cure the patient of thalassemia, you can also cure a patient who has sickle cell disease with the same product. I believed in him. I believed in the product. In 2005, San Rocco Therapeutics signed and took over the worldwide licensing, bought the worldwide licensing for his product from Memorial Sloan Kettering. In 2010, Bluebird Bio bought a French company called Genetics. They paid $35 million. It had a garbage product, a bad product, and it had been used in patients in France, 3 patients. They weren't beta globin they weren't beta globin thalassemic patients. They were E beta patients, were the least sick patients. And they pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. And they got published in October of 2010, I believe in Nature as well, saying that, oh, we cured thalassemia. And they really didn't. It's kind of like saying, you know, we burnt somebody's skin cancer off, so we've cured cancer. And that wasn't the case. Their patient, the patient that they supposedly cured, had a problem with clonal dominance and created a halt to all gene therapy in 2009. They went ahead, they knew they had a bad product. It was in a New York Times article, 2017. They admitted they had a bad product. So they didn't have much of a choice. They wanted me to sign a CDA with them. They told me they wanted to buy my product or make a deal, whatever. I told them, I'm not dealing with you unless you guarantee to use my product, because far too often products get shelved. And when I wouldn't sign a CDA or NDA, they basically sabotaged my product, stole off of it, did everything that they could, tried to change their product. I think that they still haven't done such a good job. I was waiting for Memorial Sloan Kettering to go forward. In 2015, I asked Memorial Sloan Kettering why they were being slow on the clinical trials. They didn't have really an explanation that satisfied me. We had gone from being 3 to 5 years ahead of Bluebird to being neck and neck with them. I filed to get the product back in federal court. The federal judge, Nathan, she said, I can't make them give it back to you because it wasn't in the contract. So I filed then for breach of contract. In 2017, when I was going through Discovery 18, we discovered that Bluebird Bio was behind the whole mess, and we filed against them as well. In 2020, Bluebird settled with San Rocco Therapeutics and with Sloan Kettering. Sloan Kettering settled with Bluebird Bio and with San Rocco Therapeutics. Everybody was supposed to, though, do something after that. Bluebird didn't have anything really to do, but they guaranteed in the settlement agreement that we had a worldwide license, an exclusive license for our product. Well, we discovered that they're using our product. So we don't have a worldwide license since they're using it and they were approved.
So sorry to interrupt, Patrick. I have a question about that. So if we look at when was the point, because clearly San Rocco, before it was EGT, Errant Therapeutics, or it was Errant Therapeutics, right? Errant Gene Therapeutics. When you first secured the IP in 2005, and when is the approximate point where Bluebird somehow got access to the comparable, the seemingly the same intellectual property from Memorial Sloan Kettering? What was the date of that, approximately?
2011.
And do you have any evidence of any legal transactions or documents showing that there's a license for a transfer of intellectual property?
Yeah, they never got a license. They got it's all in court documents, so I could talk about it. But they got an option agreement, and they were never supposed to use anything that they learned from Memorial Sloan Kettering because they never signed the option.
So they got an option agreement for this intellectual property that had already been licensed to your company.
Yes.
And is there any evidence that you can recall or remember in terms of discussions about your company within those artifacts?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yes, yes, yes. They're my company, because both Sloan Kettering and Bluebird knew that I owned the product. So my company name obviously came up quite often.
And was there a rationale? Was there something to the effect of, well, this is a different iteration, or was there some rationale that was used?
Yeah, really not. I mean, I think Bluebird tried to convince Sloan Kettering that they would take the two products and make a hybrid, something like that. And Sloan Kettering may or may not have believed that. Um,
So
and
so so either way, they improperly gained access to this intellectual property based on your legal position. They went about raising money on that. They ended up
billions,
go.
billions. Their stock traded at $237, had $11.8 billion market cap in 2017. In 2018, they raised 600 million at 185 and about 500 million at 162.5, $162.50, $185. Their stock today is trading around $4.50. It
Yeah,
has to be, in the history of the world, it has to be the largest implosion that I can think of, from $235 plus to $4 in 4 years.
So, and distinctly remember, Patrick, we first started writing about this situation. And, I'm not claiming the TrialSite was the reason for their stocks decline, but there was definitely an association with time. It could just been your court case, what have you. But I just remember seeing that stock price go down, down, down. Now, importantly here, when you settled with Memorial Sloan Kettering and you were, just ready to go keep investing and developing this gene therapy for those in need, very vulnerable population, including your son. We know that it tends to be a population in the Mediterranean tends to have higher incidence of these conditions. Uh, um, so
And Africa with sickle cell
and
disease.
Yes, of course,
I mean,
Mediterranean and sub-Saharan
it's
Africa.
all kind of crazy because we talk about all of, trying to make amends for past problems and discriminations, et cetera. But you've got no one in the United States basically that's up in arms about this possibility that, the sickle cell disease patients won't ever be cured because the price of the product is 2.8 million per patient.
Well, and again, on that price point, so there is an organization, a nonprofit organization, I think it's ICMR, that does valuations of
Yeah,
therapies, drugs.
ICER, and it's Steve
ICER,
Pearson. Yeah,
that's right.
and Steve Pearson is the head of it. And we have talked about this situation, and Steve says that the only thing ICER does is figure out basically in the life of a patient, how much it costs to treat a chronically ill sickle cell disease or thalassemic patient. And since, these patients are living today 50 years, and, if it costs an average of $100,000 a year to treat them, the price of their lifespan is $5 million. So 2.8 is a reasonable price. That's basically what they told me when I spoke to them about how they could approve such an outrageous price.
So yeah, and the gene therapies that come out, there's been a shift in the world of drug development, and we went from the big blockbuster era to the era of precision medicines, where very sophisticated, advanced cell or gene therapies that are approved can command enormous price points. I mean, 1 million, 2 million, and above. So there's a precedent for that, okay? Because the idea, to the point, is that the drug developer is going to invest in extensive capital, incur lots of risk. They have to mobilize the best scientists. There's so much that goes into it, as you know, phase 1, 2, 3. the costs are enormous. The probability of failure is high. So there is some rationale, for a price point that incentivizes drug development companies to remain in business to do this. The problem here with Bluebird, and again, I'm a TrialSite myself. I'm a bit biased. I know you well. I've heard your side of the story. I've read what I can read that's public. I don't know the folks at Bluebird, but what we've seen seems pretty sketchy. The behavior seems to be about enriching executives that get involved with drug development and the venture capitalists that fund them. And we've seen this, Patrick. We see a trend where private equity, venture capital, private equity brings together really smart scientists and doctors. They develop.
Or not, by the way. Maybe they're not so smart, but dishonest, because that happens as well.
In this case, there appears to be a clear, violation of all kinds of contractual and potentially criminal statutes. So in any case, what they do is they develop a really promising therapy. They get it to a certain stage. They go public. They generate the hype, the fervor. Invest. This is the future. Then they go public. And Patrick, we analyzed one firm with a lot of quote unquote smart people, and if you look at the outcomes of the publicly traded portfolio, probably 80% plus of the assets of these companies were underwater. I mean, it was a bloodbath. And typically, the mainstream investor from the Midwest or institutions, pension funds, what have you, come in later thinking that this is a big story. And what happens is, most of the stocks stay flat. And whoever was the organizer, the promoter of that company and the stock ends up making a lot of money. And that's how the game works, apparently. Now,
pump and dump.
Pump and dump. What's insidious about what happened with your case and what we find fascinating is that there's another element to this. You were essentially an outsider. You did very well. You've been on the Oprah Winfrey Show. You're well known, an artist, musician, but also you were a very successful commodities trader in Chicago, and you grew up in Southside Chicago, in a working class area, Italian area. True American success story. Where you navigated into very treacherous, sharp-filled waters called Biotech, where it's an elite group of, you can call them snobs. I mean, there's the level of snobbery and hubris. And like, who is this uneducated, from the standpoint of not a scientist, coming in and trying to play biotech developer? And they really thought that they really thought that they could rip you off. I mean, that's what the sense I get. They thought that they could rip you off. And again, I note that I'm a bit biased here, and there's always more to any story. However, there are court artifacts that have been produced that seem to imply that there's an issue on their side. So now we get to Memorial Sloan Kettering. They got some form of public funding or foundation funding to develop this exact product to get it to patients. You're trying to do that. I think it was $15 million.
15.7.
You're trying to do that. They're not complying with their settlement. What's holding them back? Why can't they just say, Patrick, San Rocco, go and develop this? What's stopping them?
Yeah. Again, I'm not sure. And I hope we don't have to get all the way to the end of court to find that out. I'm reaching out to Sloan Kettering. I don't want to say weekly, but monthly. I have a lot of faith in Sloan Kettering. I mean, they changed the CEO recently. The new guy's name is Dr. Vickers. I received a kind letter from him a couple of weeks ago. I'm hopeful. You just don't know. I hate to speculate, because I really just don't know. And I love to give the benefit of the doubt to people. A big problem is, though, is that we've wasted 2 years, over 2 years now, and Bluebird got approved at 2.8 million. They also have orphan drug exclusivity. And even though people will say you can get around orphan drug exclusivity, it's not easy to get around for one big reason. And that is that once a company has it, funding for any other company that wants to compete with the company that has orphan drug exclusivity is very difficult to find. So even if, we're able to treat 30 or 40 or 50 patients and come up with better results and say that it's a safer product, et cetera, there's really no guarantee that our product will as well be approved. Well, we would hope so.
Real quickly, just for the audience, if you could just quickly define orphan drug status.
So the 1983 Orphan Drug Act was a wonderful act, and there was a lot of wonderful people that got it going, and Marlene Hassner was one of them that I know today, and it was a great idea. But when the Orphan Drug Act was put into place, I don't think in 1983 anyone ever thought that when they said you could charge whatever you want for your product, that anyone would say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to charge $1 million." I mean, it just in 1983, 40 years ago, the morality and the way that people thought, it was just gone. Now, some people say that it changed in 1996 when Gordon Gekko said, "Greed is good." They can say whatever they want. But in 1983, they passed this act which basically said, if you can cure an orphan disease, we will allow you to charge anything you want for your product.
And orphan disease is one that's under a certain number. So it tends
to be 200,000 people in the United States, under 250,000 in Europe, because they also have. And so when you get into clinical trials, you have the orphan drug designation. I have the orphan drug designation as well. San Rocco has it. And you're able to get special collaboration from the FDA, special treatment because you're working on a rare disease. But once you're approved, then you have orphan drug exclusivity and 7 years that no one can compete against you.
So does their exclusivity preclude your drug and your gene therapy and development?
It does overall, because you need more money to produce my product and to get into clinical trials, et cetera. And if I can't raise that money, then I'm not going to be able to get into clinical trials, or I'm not going to be able to get my product approved. And recently, I think it was Catalent, and I hate doing this, but there was a recent Texas ruling where there was a small generic company who competed with a company, I think it was Catalent, who had an orphan drug exclusivity, and Catalent was charging 10, and this smaller company was charging 1. And so the FDA said, okay, we'll approve the generic company only for pediatrics. And Catalent, I believe it was, went against them, and they won. And the Texas said that you can't go against the orphan drug exclusivity in that, just because it's a cheaper price. So it's a slippery slope.
So understood. So again, back to the settlement with Memorial Sloan Kettering. So now you're going to have to try to enforce your rights to be able to develop the IP that you already had. That from your argument, you already have the rights to. At the same time, you filed lawsuits against Bluebird to essentially have the court establish that San Rocco controls that gene therapy, the underlying intellectual property, and not Bluebird, correct?
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, Bluebird basically is using our product, or at least a good part of our product, to treat the patients that they're going to charge $2.8 million for. Now,
for that particular product, I know in Europe it was approved, but I believe in Germany, and correct me if I'm wrong, the health authorities there sort of pushed back a bit because of the price point. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was approved in Germany at $1.8 million per patient in 2019. In 2020, the German government, because what they do is they approve your product, And then a year after that, they review it. And when they reviewed it, they rejected the price, which at 1.8 million was a ridiculous price, and it is a ridiculous price. And so Bluebird closed up shop in Europe basically and moved to the United States and got approved at 2.8 million.
So in the United States, do you have a sense of how many patients have been treated with this gene therapy?
Yeah, I think 6. Up until now, I think they've treated 6 up until now.
And do we have any information as to how the therapy is working?
I think it's working fairly well, and ours will work as well, be safer, I would think. But yeah, I think it's working well. There's been, unfortunately, some incidents with the sickle cell disease patients with leukemia and myelodysplastic syndrome. And of course, back in 2009, the clonal dominance. But the FDA ruled that that wasn't because of the lentiviral vector and maybe was for other reasons. Nobody really will ever really know. I actually wrote a citizen's petition to the FDA trying to get them to block the approval of Bluebird's product, partially because of safety concerns and me believing, and maybe I'm wrong, that scientific data, recent scientific data points that these lentiviral vectors could be safer with an insulator. So my argument was, look at, we have the thalassemia patients and sickle cell disease patients that aren't dying tomorrow. They have an average lifespan in the United States and in Europe of, well over 30 years old. So why don't we hold off a little bit and let's see what happens with the insulators, so that we don't find ourselves in 5 or 6 years saying, oh my God, we approve these products and now we've got some patients who aren't doing so well because they have ulterior, ulterior diseases because of the therapy that they did.
So, just a quick note on the science. So the insulator, at a high level, just for the lay person's benefit, why is the insulator good for the safety profile? What does it do?
Yeah, I mean, so if you have a negative and positive charged wire, and you have to put an insulator on it so that it doesn't jump, and it's the same thing. You need an insulator possibly on the lentiviral vectors because when they land in the chromosomes, you don't want them landing right next to an oncogene and triggering it. So it's insulated. It's insulated from the other genes around it, so it doesn't create any unwanted actions.
Got it. That's really helpful. Patrick, give us a sense of the timeline. What does this look like? What's the timeline? What are the milestones out over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months? What are the key dates?
So I would say that in January, the patent people will listen to the arguments of Bluebird Bio and the defense of Sloan Kettering about the patents. I will try to speak with Sloan Kettering. Otherwise, where the court case goes ahead, we just filed for RICO in Massachusetts, and that usually moves a little bit faster. I hope that it does, and I'm hoping that I can get our product back and we can continue the clinical trial, which is still open.
Which is key. Now the RICO, this is a racketeering kind of criminal statute, is it not?
Yes, it is. I mean, one of the biggest problems is with the Orphan Drug Act and with healthcare in the United States overall is that the executives, like you said, I mean, when you have the top executives making $20 million and then they have 30 other executives around them making between $1 and $10 million, there's very little work. There's very little left for research. And the crazy thing is that all of these salaries get figured into drug development. You need a CEO to develop drugs. Well, yeah, I guess you do, but you don't need a CEO who makes 10 million a year or 5 million a year. But unfortunately, that's what's going on. So all of the corporations are protected by the corporate veil. And what RICO does is that it pierces the corporate veil and allows the Justice Department to go after the individuals.
Right. and that's typically a state or a public prosecutor would typically use that.
Federal.
Federal prosecutor would use
It's typically
those.
federal.
Yeah,
Massachusetts has it's called 93A, which is a state RICO basically, but it is typically federal, and it was
right,
mostly used against the Italians for the most part. I mean, there has been other instances.
right.
The Major League Baseball, they used it once, and they
Yeah.
they do use it from time to time. There's been a big call from professors around the United States, led by Eugene McCarthy at George. I think he's at George Washington University. No, he's in actually in Washington D.C. John Madison, is it John Madison? I believe. Anyway, and,
Yeah,
oh,
it's something like that.
yeah, sorry, or Georgetown, but they called for using RICO against big pharma because we've seen these cases like the opioid problem with Purdue and the
Oh,
Sackler.
yeah.
And in the end, we've got 1 million people dead. We have criminal activity, without a doubt, criminal activity, and it's proven criminal activity. But because the corporation or because the Justice Department can't penetrate the corporate shield, it ends up they're going to settle out of court, and it's just monetary. Another thing, and Richard Sackler was the CEO for Purdue and the
Yeah,
Sackler.
Purdue.
And what happened similarly back in between 1994 and 2001 or two, Paxil was going through clinical trials. Paxil is an antidepressant drug, and GlaxoSmithKline, who at the time was SmithKline Beecham, they purposely hid that children got suicidal thoughts while using Paxil. And there was an estimated 60,000 suicides of adolescents primarily for that product. And so in 2012, the Justice Department levied a $3 billion fine against GlaxoSmithKline, which had taken SmithKline Beecham over. And kind of an ironic thing about that was that the CEO between 1994 and 2001 was Jan Leschly. So Bluebird Bio, yes. So Jan Leschly is Nick's father. And you'll remember that in the days of the mafia, that one of the reasons that the government went against the Italians was that the Italians were passing down power and the reins from father to son, so that it was perpetuating into eternity, etc. And unfortunately, in our situation, we have that coincidence.
Yeah, it's definitely a really, really disturbing situation. Your case and the impediments that have been one after the other that you had to run into. And I give you a lot of credit for how you've navigated this whole situation. You're having successful settlements that clearly, very large, prominent institutions are acknowledging, your rights, your company's rights. I think you're going to win this. I think that, your case is glaring. It points to what's rotten about this healthcare system. It really does, because it's that mindset and the need for not we all appreciate capitalism and markets and profits. You and I talk about that you need that, but this is beyond that. This is above and beyond that. This is sort of hyper wealth. This is a greedy race to winner take all by any means necessary, and that's just not right. And so that's why at TrialSite, we support a good healthcare system. We support industry, pharmaceutical companies. We chronicle research centers.
That's right. There's a lot of wonderful CEOs that I know personally, and a lot of wonderful companies out there that are really helping people and doing things in the old-fashioned American way. And I agree with you 100%. And what we need to do is weed out the other ones, which in the end are ruining it for all of the honest ones. Because when you take a company like Bluebird and the stock goes from 200 plus to $4, and you've built all of those investors out of all that money, and you knew what you were doing, and you allowed your executives to sell their shares into this very naive marketplace. You had Chinese investors, and you had Indian investors, and you had German investors, and you had African investors. You had investors from all over the world who believes in our market system. And what you do when you create these kind of phony and these kind of crooked and these kind of disasters is people start having concern about capitalism in the United States. And not only do you hurt patients, but you hurt every investor and you hurt every taxpayer. I mean, 70% of all thalassemic patients and sickle cell disease patients are on government aid. Well, if you're charging 2.8 million instead of 7 or 800,000, and if you're treating, 20,000 patients over 5 years or 10 years, I mean, the damage you did to the U.S. taxpayer, you just can't even, there's not enough zeros on your calculator. And unfortunately, that's just what's going on with a small amount of these companies. 90% of the pharmaceutical companies are, in my opinion, are great people, great companies, doing good work, etc. And definitely, it's like definitely, one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch, and that's what we need to do. We just need to weed out the bad apples.
I 100% agree with you, Patrick. It's really it tends to be a minority of sort of group. It's not the majority. The most disturbing thing in all of this is the patient. The patient is what matters. Okay, it's the whole healthcare system, markets, everything. It's about the patient, and time is of the essence. And you have a product that's your IP based on everything that has unfolded so far. What I've reviewed, again, recognizing there's other perspectives. But it's about the patients, and every day that you're delayed with this clinical trial, it's costing more to get the right product potentially with a safer profile, and patients are suffering, and some patients will die, but possibly because of that. So,
no, not possibly. That's how it is.
Yeah, and so for me, it's a real urgency. We're on this, we're on this planet to make a difference. Making a living is important, however, not at the cost of our humanity. So again, we encourage what you're doing. We'll be tracking updates. It's highly impressive that you've made it this far, and I think
I'm still alive.
And you're still alive, and you're going hard.
Because that happens as well. Unfortunately, that's
You're lucky. You're blessed with good genes. You seem to be getting better looking as you get older. So maybe it's that as well, huh? So I would say this: is there anything you want our audience to think about, consider, anything before we call it a day for this interview?
Yes. So any of the audience, I believe that the American drug industry, pharma industry, is a wonderful, wonderful vehicle for change and people. I believe that 90% of them are just incredibly wonderful people. I'm a big fan of St. Jude, as a matter of fact. And that's for sure. We need to weed out the bad players. And I'm going to try to do my best in my situation. And in the old days, we'd call them prayers. Today, everybody wants to say, I'll send you my warmest thoughts, but kind of it's a synonym for prayers. But anyway, if you're watching and you watch this, I would really appreciate it. You send me your best wishes, your prayers, etc. I believe in karma, and I believe that the love that surrounds us all will save us all. And so if you could send it my way, I'd really appreciate it.
I think you're going to get a lot of that. So we're grateful for having you, Patrick. We'll be in touch. And, again, thank you for coming on to TrialSite News.
Thank you, sir.